Welcome to PodJunction Podcast, a show for podcasters who want to use their podcast to grow their business. I'm your host, Sadaf Beynon, and today I'm joined by Skip Wilson, a standout in the advertising world and host of the Advertising Podcast. With a career spanning decades, Skip has been at the forefront of digital media innovation and now leads Draft Media Partners. Welcome to the show, Skip. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, thanks so much. Skip, you've had a remarkable journey in advertising, starting as a copywriter at 16. What inspired you to start the Advertising Podcast?
So I started the podcast mostly, honestly, that was our sort of attempt to begin to tell our story and tell the story of our brand. So, the main reason I started the podcast, being fully transparent, was because for marketing purposes, for purely self-serving purposes. Now, that said, we wanted to make a show that was actually beneficial and actually offered some insights and benefits to the listener, of course. But the main reason was because that was I came from, before Draft, I was the vice president of digital media at iHeart Media. And we built out, one of the main things we built out in my division was the iHeart podcast network. And just seeing the power of podcasting, both large podcasts as well as small podcasts, and the power and impact it can have on businesses. I was like, really should always be a part of someone's go-to-market strategy.
So how does your podcast then complement the work that you're doing at Draft Media?
Yeah. So one of the rules I have for starting a podcast venture is, because we're actually about to launch another one too. Okay. But one of my main rules is if there's 0 listeners or 1 million listeners, it needs to be structured in a way to where there's benefit to the company. Because that's something that a lot of folks don't realize is everyone, of course, thinks, if I start a podcast, then I need, 10,000 downloads a month or something like that in order to make it worth it. But that's actually not true. For some formats, that's true. Like if your goal is to support the podcast through advertising revenue or something like that, then you're typically paid by a cost per thousand basis. So you need thousands of listeners. But for starting like a business focused podcast or a podcast that's like business adjacent, it's actually, you really don't need any listeners at all. One of the main things that I look at is, one, creating a reservoir of knowledge so that if we bring someone into our ecosystem, we can send them a link to things so that they can listen and become a part of our culture and understand the reason why we structure things the way we do and those types of things. Mm-hmm. And then also with the advertising podcast in particular, that was really a lead generation play. Like our main goal with that podcast was to invite people onto the podcast that we otherwise wouldn't be able to have conversations with.
So your guests that are on your podcast are people that you want to have as your clients eventually.
Correct. Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, go on.
No, you're fine. But yeah, no, that's exactly right. It's just a lot easier to say, the way our business is structured, the way Draft Media Partners is structured is a little different than a traditional ad agency. We mostly work behind the scenes of other ad agencies and marketers and media companies. And so if it's a fractional CMO, we're their team that they outsource things to. If it's a mid-sized ad agency, then usually there's, they may do AdWords themselves, but anything else, they're going to want to sub it out to someone else. And then that's where we come in. So those folks are all very busy people that don't normally have, a lot of time to just sit down and chit chat. And so it's just a lot easier to say, hey, be a guest of our podcast than it is to say, hey, let's talk about what makes Draft so wonderful, because that we get 1 million of those emails every day, right?
Yeah, totally. Okay. So Do you have any stories of people that you've had on the show that have then turned out to be great clients?
Yeah, we do it in a very soft sell way. We're very much if you build it from a business standpoint. Now, this isn't necessarily a podcast uh, so much question, but if your business is structured in my opinion, sort of the right way, and then you have a very compelling product that really almost sort of sells itself.
Yeah.
So I would say actually, I mean, pretty much not 100% of the time, but almost 100% of the time, when we sort of in natural conversation will go through and I can mention something like, our simulator tool that we built or the platform that we built or something like that, then there's always intrigue or interest because we are different than what's out there, and our platform is different than what exists in the marketplace. Also, too, every conversation in the business to business world always begins with at least in the West, always begins with what do you do? Right? That's like the first question. It's like, oh, draft media partners, what do you guys do? And so that's just an instant invitation for your elevator pitch. And so as long as you have that message crafted to that individual or audience, that can be really compelling.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that actually for the kind of podcast that you've got, where it's business adjacent, you don't actually need many listeners or any listeners.
Right.
So how then, well, I guess one of my questions is, do you focus at all in any kind of monetization strategies, or is it just purely based on your guests and kind of drive that top of funnel kind of experience?
So like I mentioned, we're about to start another podcast,
Yeah.
Called The Advertising Singularity. Shameless plug, although it doesn't exist yet, but called The Advertising Singularity, where what that show is really all about, talking about like the future of advertising technology and the things that are being built right now. Because there was over 1,000 marketing SaaS products that came to market in just the past 30 days.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of, I feel like the phrase is overused all the time that, we're in a time of change or those types of things, or we're in an unprecedented time, but we truly are in the marketing world. I mean, there's so many MarTechs just popping up constantly. And so that's really what that show is about. Mm-hmm. That is a show format that we're kind of doing. It serves two purposes. One, there's really not going to be guests on that show. So there might occasionally be, if we are talking about a specific product or something like that, there might be a guest. But for the most part, the format of that show isn't to have guests. So for that one, there's really two monetization strategies. One is it creates what I call like a binge bank for people that are in our pipeline. Mm-hmm. So one of the, in business, especially service businesses or business to business businesses, companies only do business with people that they know, like, and trust.
Yep.
And so by having a podcast, even if it's only, 10 to 20 episodes or something like that, that you can work into your pipeline so that you can say, hey, and if you want to learn more about us, listen to this. Most people will ignore it, but for those handful of customers that do actually, or not customers, but rather prospects that do actually start to listen to that, then they're become instant brand advocates, right? And they understand what you mean. Like we have some internal phrases like, no failure, only feedback. And if I mention things like our simulator tool and those types of things, that means nothing unless someone's already in our world, right? And a podcast is a nice way to bring them into our world without us having to actually spend hours with them, right? Yeah. We spent hours creating content once, and then they're getting to enjoy it. But with that one too, because there is no guests, listeners it's another one where if there's only 10 or 15 listeners, but those 10 or 15 listeners are in our pipeline, there's benefit to us. Yeah. But that is one where eventually we would want to scale that up to try to tell the story of our company and things more. Yeah. So there would be a little bit more of a monetization strategy.
Right. Okay. Cool. So going back to your the advertising podcast, correct me if I'm wrong, but your primary audience then for that podcast also intersects with your target market for draft media. Is that correct?
That's a great question, because actually, no,
Okay.
it should. And I mean, or, in theory, it should, right? Um, but but because of the way we wanted that, we actually structured it to where it has benefit for our guest. Because remember, like with that podcast, like it's all about whoever our guest is. And so what we wanted to do was create a podcast that has incredible value to whoever that guest is. And then, because it's the guest that's the value to us.
Yeah.
And so we actually, the target audience of that podcast is actually business, small business owners. We don't really work with small business owners directly. We have a handful of them, but for the most part, we only work with, internal marketing departments, small to mid-sized agencies, and fractional CMOs. So they might listen to it, but a lot of it is like advertising basics and those types of things that they probably would not get a ton out of unless they're new to the advertising world. But a small business owner would get incredible value. And the small business owner is the target audience for a small to mid-sized agency or a fractional CMO. So we created something that is a benefit to our target audience, which is the guest, not necessarily the target audience of the podcast.
Right. Gotcha. Okay, cool. So, what strategies then have been most effective for promoting your podcast and expanding? I mean, I'm asking expanding listener base because there's still an element of that, right?
When you have high quality guests on that have a bit of a following themselves, that itself is a sort of marketing strategy, because most folks who are a part of a podcast instantly want to tell the world, right? Like you want to say, hey, listen to this, check this out. They're going to want to promote that themselves. And so what's nice about that is that you don't have to, like, we don't have to do a lot of promotion to get, several hundred downloads just organically, right? And then a certain percentage of those folks that they're promoting to will like the podcast and will begin to follow it themselves. And so it sort of has this sort of slow growth, slow organic growth over time. If I was creating, for example, the other podcast, if I was to try to get, if that was my goal, was to get as many listeners as possible, then one of the first things I would do is think through some sort of, and this might just be because I have a bent towards paid advertising, but I would have sort of a paid advertising strategy in mind. A few $100 on Spotify or a few $100 on YouTube can go a long way for a podcast.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you're able to then leverage your expertise, aren't you?
Yeah, right, exactly. And because you can target, I mean, even the self-serve side. I mean, even anybody listening to this can also just do this themselves as well. You don't have to go through someone else, but there's benefit to it. And if you do, you can call us, draftmediapartners.com. Another shameless plug. But but if you are trying to set that up, I mean, you can go to Spotify right now and choose podcasts that have similar interests, or listeners of podcasts that have similar interests to what your topic is. And, it's not like it takes thousands of dollars to see a return. Obviously, the more you put into it, the more you get out of it, the quicker you get out of it, all of those things. But, it can truly work for any budget. The other thing that we've done too to help promote that podcast is the apply to be a guest. That's the only ad that we've ever put towards that budget, and it's targeted at specific companies. Usually we'll use something like LinkedIn. As a matter of fact, I think we might have only used LinkedIn, but we could have used LinkedIn and programmatic display and a few other tactics targeted at specific companies, saying apply to be a guest.
So how did you do that? Sorry, can you spell that out a bit more? What was the process for that?
So any paid media strategy should always begin with, who am I trying to reach, right? So who do I want to get in front of? And you want to be as specific with that as possible. So If it's business owners, for example, then okay, but I don't know of any B2B company that works with all business owners. So small to mid-sized, businesses, or, is it company size that's the difference? Is it what industry they're in that's the difference? And you want to try to whittle it down to, like for us, it was a very specific niche. So we actually did job title targeting on LinkedIn, because we're looking for people with specific job titles. But depending on, so you want to get as specific on who you're trying to reach as possible. Then you figure out where are those folks, which for us is LinkedIn. For someone listening, your folks may not be on LinkedIn at all. If we were trying to reach business owners, I think LinkedIn's actually a terrible platform for that, because business owners, for the most part, they all have LinkedIn, but nobody's just on LinkedIn for fun unless you're a mid-tier VP, director, or lower, because the only real reason to be on LinkedIn is if you're trying to get a promotion, and business owners aren't trying to get a promotion. Mm-hmm. So that's not the platform I would choose. Mm-hmm. And so who's your audience? You figure out where are they, and then you figure out, okay, what's the one thing I'm trying to get them to do? Now, in other words, you can't run an ad saying, listen to my podcast and apply to be a guest, or apply to be a guest, because that should be two different groups, two different ads, two different call to actions. An ad can only do one thing. Mm-hmm. And so you try to figure out what that one thing is. I want them to, apply to be a guest, or I want them to listen, those things. And then you want to think about the environment of where they are when they're trying to do the thing. So that's why I mentioned, if you're trying to get listeners, YouTube is great. Spotify is great, because if I'm listening to podcasts on Spotify, I'm a podcast listener already. So for me to switch from one podcast to another, incredibly easy. YouTube is, I think, already the second largest podcast network or podcast platform, and it's going to continue to grow. Mm-hmm. And so if I'm on YouTube, it's very simple for me to, instead of watching a cat play piano, I can switch over and watch, and listen to this podcast about this topic that I'm interested in.
Yeah. That's cool. So if you're trying to build a listener base on YouTube or Spotify, how do you do that? Is that SEO related, or is that something different?
So you should always, SEO, there's a difference between with SEO and SEM. SEO is organic growth. The analogy I always use is diet and exercise. Okay. SEO is diet and exercise. It takes a long time to get results, but then once you get those results, as long as you keep up the good habits, it stays. And even if you stop the good habits for a little bit, you can go on vacation without gaining all your weight back, right? Mm. You can, and those types of things. So, but if you stop those habits for 2 years, then it's like it never existed. So it's very much habit-based and ongoing. SEM, and the advantage to SEO is that it has staying power, and it's more or less free. It's just really about having good business practices, making sure that you've got listener benefit, making sure that you are promoting it the way you should on your own social channels and those things. So that's SEO. SEM is all about paid ads, and it's more like a light switch. It's more like the stuff that Eddie Murphy drinks in The Nutty Professor. I don't know if you remember that movie or saw that movie. It's more like that. You can instantly become skinny, but then the minute it stops, you're instantly not skinny anymore, right? Mm-hmm. And that's more what paid ads are. And the advantage, of course, is that you could have 1 million listeners tomorrow. Mm-hmm. It just might cost you several $1,000s to make that happen. And so for some folks, it just depends on what your time horizon is like. Mm-hmm. And SEO should always be a part of your strategy, because it's free and it's really just about doing good business. It's about getting reviews, getting subscribers, picking good topics, having good listener retention. If your SEO is bad, then that probably means if your SEO is bad continuously for years, then that means you probably have just done a poor execution job.
Yeah.
If you're SEM, SEM on the other hand, isn't the best choice for everyone. If a podcast is like your side hustle or totally tangential to your business or something you're kind of just doing as a hobby, then it's not worth the investment unless you've just got, there's some folks that'll drop like, unless you've got yacht money, right? Unless you can drop like 30 grand in ads and just don't care. Mm-hmm. But with that said too, it's not like it takes a ton of money. You can a few $100 a month or $100 or so a month if you're doing it yourself. Can be beneficial.
Right. So if any of our listeners who are starting out or wanting to take the free route and wanting to be better or to even do SEO, haven't been doing it, where would be a good starting point? What are some pointers you would give them?
So I think it was Steven Spielberg that was asked like if he had advice for someone who wanted to be a director.
Okay.
And when they were younger and starting out, and his main advice was watch movies. Just be an avid movie watcher. That's sort of step one. And I think the same thing is true with podcasts. If you're somebody who doesn't know what a podcast is, like sometimes we'll get, I have a good friend of ours actually, just down the street from us, that's what they do is they build like content strategies for folks. And one of the things he jokes about all the time is there will be some CEO or something in there that has never listened to a podcast, has no interest in podcasts, but is just being told they should have a podcast. That podcast is doomed to fail from the start, right? Because that person's not going to know what makes a good one. They're not going to know anything about it. So the first thing I would recommend is whatever your niche is, be an avid consumer of podcasts in that niche for at least say 2 months. Or if you're in a real big hurry, 1 month. Spend a month just consuming as much of that content as possible. If you're a marketer, then you should be listening to anything and everything that has Gary V on it or something like that. You should just be like absorbing all of that stuff because it'll do a couple of different things. One, it'll highlight best practices. There's a reason that whether it's a small podcast or a massive podcast, it always ends with please leave a comment, like, subscribe, and those types of things. So it'll allude to best practices. You'll also pick up on things that you like and things you don't like. You'll be like, ooh, that's cool. I like how they had specific segments and I like that. I want to do that. Or, oh, I like how that's conversational. There's no right or wrong way. You figure out the stuff that you like and don't like. And then also the other benefit is that it'll help you figure out where there's a hole, for the Advertising Singularity podcast, for the one we're about to launch, I realize there's really not a space for like objectively looking at new ad technology. The only ones that exist are ones that are made by ad technologies. So those of course all had a vested interest. So it can also help you figure out where there's a hole in the market.
Yeah, that's cool. No, that's great advice. I particularly like what you said about being an avid consumer of podcasts in order to learn it better. I think that is just so true. Understanding how it's done and kind of taking ownership as well, isn't it, of your own podcast when you're doing it, because you can see how other people are doing it. What's the right fit for you?
Exactly. Yeah, because there really is no wrong or right way. The edited podcast, if you look at the top 10 podcasts in any category, you'll see that there are 15-minute ones and there are 3-hour ones. And you'll see that there are conversational ones and there are ones that are very edited and very well produced. And it's not like only one format works. It's more, you should try to pick the one that's more appropriate to you, because if you don't have time to do a well edited and produced podcast, then you're only going to do it for probably 5 or 6 weeks before you start getting frustrated with it and just stop.
Abandon it.
If you're, and then, so in that case, do conversational. But if you're somebody who is not very verbose or doesn't like talking very much, then maybe lean more towards edited and produced.
Yeah. So how do you do yours?
The advertising podcast is because we are talking to marketing people, and for the most part, marketing people are definitely more on the verbose side. Like they all, pretty much everyone in the advertising world is, somebody who can just gab on and on and on. And so for us, conversational worked out better in that space. For any other podcast, I don't have time for it now, but I actually enjoy doing like production work and those types of things. So I could see eventually doing a very well produced, polished podcast because I just enjoy doing it.
Yeah.
But right now I'm struggling to get through my inbox each day. So right now is not the time for that, but eventually I can see doing that.
Yeah. I guess holding those two things together is quite the task.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I would suggest picking one though. You don't want to change formats. Doing it for like a one show up like special or something like that. But I would suggest picking one and going with it, and then try your best to stick with that more or less format every time. Because I think we've all been listening to a show that we're expecting to be 30 minutes and suddenly it's 15 minutes and we feel cheated, or, we won't even click on that one that's 3 hours because it's usually a 10-minute podcast, or something like that. I would always the consistency, I think, is more important than what you choose.
Yeah, that's great. That's really true. How do you select and invite guests onto your show? Because I know you talk to marketers, but how do you decide on which ones you want on your show?
We really try to look for folks that have had, that have somewhat of a presence already.
Okay.
There's a couple of reasons for that. One, it's kind of like today's version of hiring somebody from like Harvard or something like that, right? Like the reason that they likely have a little bit of a following is because they know what they're talking about. The other reason is that they're probably engaging and a compelling, speaker, person, presenter. And so that's the other thing. And then of course the third benefit is more of the selfish benefit, which is that then when they promote it out to their following, it's got a little bit more of a, it's just reaching more people. So that's how we select it. I will say that I don't think it's another one of those things where I don't think there's a right or wrong answer in general, but the advice I would give is think, who does the audience of the podcast want to listen to?
Yeah.
So, for the advertising podcast, it is small business owners. Who do they want to listen to? They want to listen to experts in marketing that know how small businesses should market. So while it would be awesome to have like the CEO of Apple, to have Tim Cook on the podcast or something like that, the reality is that, and we definitely wouldn't say no to that, but he hasn't asked yet. But the reality is that that's probably not going to be as beneficial an episode to the listener of the small business owner as having, somebody who has a mid-sized marketing agency in Des Moines, right? Like that's probably going to be somebody who has more advice. Yeah.
So let's a question about your audience. How do you get feedback from them? How do you know what they like, what they don't like, what they want more of, what they don't like for you to be talking about or doing?
So there's a number of reputation tools and listening tools. We have one on our own platform, trying to not do a bunch of shameless plugs, but you teed that one up so well. I had to say it. On part of the Draft Business Center is a reputation management tool that scrubs likes, mentions, comments about a business. But there's other ones too. So one way to do it, and of course the free version of it is just to constantly be looking at those things, but constantly be inviting feedback and then reading and paying attention to the feedback. People will tell you what they like and don't like. Also, early on, when you have, say, less than 100 listeners or so, you're probably not going to get many comments, likes, and those types of things. So instead, you're just paying attention to the data. Like, what's the retention rate like? Am I losing people 5 minutes in? If so, I either need to make it a lot shorter or make it a lot better, right? And so just paying attention to data, both the qualitative and the quantitative feedback that you get.
Yeah. Have you had any feedback that has maybe changed the direction of what you were doing?
I mean, definitely in my iHeart days, the draft one, the draft podcast just has essentially like not enough scale to really get good feedback other than the qualitative stuff. And again, that's sort of not by design, but we didn't design it to do otherwise. So of course it's not going to just grow big on its own. But definitely in the iHeart days, I mean, that's a huge part of what we're constantly doing. What we were constantly doing was trying to figure out, okay, if we add in longer music segments or there's something like that, what does that do to listener retention? And yeah, you should always be paying attention to those things, at least monthly. Be paying attention to what's my retention rate like? How many? That's the main statistic. If you're not getting any listens at all, then you're probably picking poor topics, or you're doing something bad with titling. Maybe on YouTube it's something like thumbnail or something like that, but it's probably a titling and topic issue.
Okay.
If you're getting starts but not a lot of retention, or it's just not growing, then it may be more of a quality issue. So then you need to look at, okay, what can I do to take this show to the next level? But one of the biggest mistakes I see is someone will have a podcast with low listeners and not really growing, not really doing anything. And then they'll just keep making the content better. But the reality is that you could have the most well-produced, greatest podcast in the world, but if it's on a topic nobody cares about, or it's titled poorly, no one's going to know that exists.
So is there a way to appear higher up on Spotify?
There's
how to word that question. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, no, yes is the short answer. There's two ways. I mean, you either pay to get there through ads, or you earn your spot there through organic growth.
Okay.
That's how to do it. So I would be intentional about if it's the organic growth strategy, be intentional about, which again, like I said, everyone should have an organic growth strategy, because why not? Be intentional about your topics, be intentional about guests if you have guests, be intentional about your titles. Make sure that you are doing simple things like, promoting on your own channels. If you do have guests, make sure you're giving them stuff to promote, make it easy for them to share, and promote. And then that should always be a part of it. If it's paid media plan, then it's the same principles, but I would almost pick, like, if you're just looking for pure listeners, one of the greatest things I would do, especially if you have a small budget, is figure out like which of my episodes add the most organic listens, say over the past 30 days or whatever, unless it's an evergreen show, in which case any time frame is fine. You just don't want to be talking about like Christmas and like, and then it's a June podcast or something. Yeah. But pick which show had the best listens organically, and then promote that one. If you're unsure which one to pick, that's the one that your audience is saying, we like this one the best.
Yeah.
Choose that one.
Cool.
And it's not always the one I like all the time, whether it's even in person, like if it's speaking at events or speaking at things, or being guests of stuff or whatever. All the time I'll leave a presentation or leave whatever thinking like either I crushed it or that was terrible. And there doesn't really seem to be a correlation between how I feel on that and what the end result is. Yeah. There are plenty of times where I've been like, well, I messed that one up, and then we'll land like a huge piece of business, or it'll be great, or I'll get a lot of feedback. And there's plenty of times where I'm like, hey, that was fantastic. That was great. And then I just crickets and nothing ever happens. Yeah, exactly. And so yeah, how we feel doesn't matter, because we have a very different, experience than anyone listening would. And so I think it's almost impossible to guess how, like, for yourself, which one's the best one.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. What are some of the biggest challenges you faced in running the advertising podcast?
the biggest challenge is, I would, especially for someone starting out, the biggest challenge is overcoming that like sense of that you're just creating content that's going out into the void. That's this big hurdle I'd say that everyone's going to have to overcome at some point. But just remember that everyone did that, right? Like everyone had to start out with that point of you're creating content that's just sort of dying on the vine. And that's okay, because that doesn't mean that that's always going to be that way. And those types of things. I would say that's the biggest challenge. For the advertising podcast in particular, we ran into a scalability issue. In other words, we're a small team. We're a team of only about 10 individuals. And we actually got so overwhelmed just with work, like just with, having client flow and keeping up with orders and those types of things, that we essentially ceased all marketing efforts, including the podcast for a time, because the last thing we needed was more business for a period of time. I would say that was the biggest challenge. And so what stinks about that, when you have to take a long break like that, is you're essentially starting over again. So I would only do those things if you have no other choice. Keeping something going from weekly to bi-weekly, is better than stopping entirely.
So what did you do? You stopped, did you say?
We did. But that was only because the last thing we needed was more folks. So if you're struggling with orders, then the last thing you need is more orders.
Yeah.
But we're in a different phase now. We've hired up and all those things. But yeah, that's something to think about, especially if it's a business focused podcast or a podcast that you're doing for business reasons, is you just want to almost sort of have the seasonality in mind. For example, if I was an accountant, let's say that we were an accountant and we were doing an accounting podcast, which doesn't sound thrilling, but let's say that it was. Then what I would, that January through April is horrible time for like every accountant everywhere is just hating life for those 3 to 4 months. So rather than doing a weekly podcast year round, think in terms of seasons. Do like a 20 episode season, and then produce that in June through October, when you've got plenty of time on your hands.
Yeah.
So be intentional about where it falls into your realm as well, which we did not do a good job of, and that's why that was our biggest challenge.
Yeah. Well, I guess there's learning from it, right? And that's what's the best thing that comes out of challenges. So so how do you then manage your time and maintain that balance now with draft media and with the podcast?
We've hired folks. I mean, that's that's the main way. Delegation and scaling things up. I mean, that's one way to solve the problem. The other thing is just to be intentional about your to-do list and your task list, treating it with if you book a recording time for your own podcast, stick to it. Keep it like it's an important client meeting with your most important person. That's the only way sort of to do it. And if that's the case, if you are for us, where we're each day is so changes so wildly based on how many appointments we have that day. Like my calendar today looks incredibly different than my calendar tomorrow. There would be no way I could do a live at Thursday at 2 p.m. podcast, right? Because I would have no clue whether Tuesday at 2 p.m. on Thursday works. So that means that I either need to pay for a service that I can pre-record and make it seem live, or intentionally not do a live one.
Yeah, you have to make it work for yourself. And like, as you mentioned before, the consistency aspect of it, with bearing that in mind and still being able to make the podcast work for you.
Exactly, because you want it to go out to the public You can record it whenever. Nobody really cares about that. But when it goes out to the public, that's what you need to be consistent with constantly. And so that's why I would not choose a live format podcast. Because I don't really like the ones that seem live but aren't, because I think that's disingenuous. Although no judgment on anyone that does do that, because that's fine too. But I just don't like that format, because I can't say have consistency on the recording side, but there's really no excuse not to have consistency on the posting side. That's just like making, at some point during your week, make sure that you've got something scheduled for next week.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've talked about consistency. Is there anything else that you think are good skills or attributes that are essential for running a successful podcast?
The main thing that I think is essential is being a good storyteller, being able to talk in things like, consistent themes. Even if you have a purely conversational type podcast, you want it to always have a consistent theme. You want each person to sort of play a role or character so that they have, what's called parasocial consistency. So, in other words, if someone's always the funny, goofy guy, you want that person to always be the funny, goofy guy. And if somebody else is always the more serious person, you always want that person to be the more serious person. So you want to recognize that what you're trying to do is provide some sort of benefit, even if the benefit is just entertainment to that listener. That's your number one priority. Usually that comes in the form of couching it in a compelling story. So if it's just one person on the podcast, you want to make sure it's got an introduction, 3 points, and conclusion. If it's if it's the conversational one, then like I said, you want to make sure everybody's playing their roles and that it's all got consistent themes. So internal consistency as well as consistency with when to post and those things.
I'm going to ask you, and I'm sorry again, I didn't prep you for this, so I hope you don't mind.
No.
All right. So Skip, this is something I like to ask my guests, and that is that can you in 60 seconds tell me why you think podcasts are great for, or are a great tool rather for growing your business?
Podcasts are a great tool for growing your business because ultimately business is about people, and people like stories, and we like the people that we like. And that sounds almost obvious because it's been true for literally since there were humans. And podcast is just a current way to get someone to spend a lot of time with your company, whether it's a decision maker or someone in your company, to get to know and like the brand. There's just not a better way to drive brand affinity than telling stories. And podcast is just the current way of doing that.
Fantastic. Thank you. That was great. Thank you. Well, Skip, it's clear that your podcast has become a cornerstone of your business strategy. And your journey is full of valuable lessons for anyone looking to leverage podcasting for business growth. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences and insights with us today, and for bringing such value to PodJunction. And that brings us to the end of today's episode at PodJunction. If you've enjoyed the insights from this episode and want to hear the full conversation with today's special guest, don't forget to visit podjunction.com, where you'll find more information about how you can join PodJunction cohort. Whether you listened while on the go or in a quiet moment, thank you for letting us be a part of your day. Remember, every episode is a chance to gain insights and to transform your business with podcasting. So keep on tuning in, keep on learning, and until next time, happy podcasting.